Welcome to Club Soda's Mindful Drinking Festival. We're online, global, and as always, absolutely free. Hi, I'm Drew, and I'm one of the co-founders of Club Soda.
And I'm Laura, the other co-founder of Club Soda. We help you change your drinking in ways that help you live well. So whether you're looking to cut down, stop for a bit, or quit, you can find what you need from podcasts and books and courses on joinclubsoda.com. This festival, we've brought you an amazing lineup from over 100 people from across the world.
And our programme this time really is global.
Every day starts down under with me, Sarah. As well as organising the festival in Australia, I spend my time looking for alcohol-free alternatives and tips for people who choose not to drink, but who still want to live a social, fun and adventurous life.
And I'll be wrapping up each day here in the States. I'm Amanda, your US festival host and coordinator, and I'm also a mindset coach who helps women change their relationship with alcohol so that they can start living their most authentic life.
Each day with a rolling programme of inspirational panels, conversations, social events, and opportunities to discover new low and low alcohol drinks.
So whether you want inspiration to change your drinking,
Or to connect with other people,
or you want to discover and enjoy a new low and no alcohol drink,
The Mindful Drinking Festival is for you.
cheers!
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 cheers.
Well, good evening and welcome to Men Drinking Mindfully. My name is Martin Tod. I'm the Chief Executive of the Men's Health Forum, which is a UK-based men's health charity. The clue is in the name. And we've got a really interesting panel here this evening to talk about men and drink and mindfulness. Ruari Fairbairns from Scotland-based 1 Year No Beer. Anit Chatrath, who is a Club Soda member. Antony Moss, who is a professor of addictive behaviour science at London South Bank University. Shea Boland, who's a transformational coach from the United States. And last but by no means least, we have Daniel Moore from the Boozebreak Podcast. So maybe we'll just start with a simple question, probably going in the same order as I've just been through. Ruari, what's your experience? Well, first of all, please introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about what you're doing, about your drinking experience, and what brought you here today.
Absolutely. And wave at me if my internet goes wonky. So the whistle-stop background, born in Scotland, West Coast, synonymous with drinking culture, but I mean, so is most of the UK, right? Found myself moving down to London to become an oil broker. And really two worlds collided for me, partying and being successful. The more I partied, the more successful I was. I was very good at my job. And, after 10 odd years at oil broking, really the booze started to wear a bit thin. The thing is, for me, alcohol was never really a problem. Nobody was telling me I had a problem. It was perfectly normalized in the job I was in. And, I'd be sociable at work and I'd probably hang out with friends at the weekend. So I could be drunk 2 or 3 times a week. I would never go home and drink. People weren't like, you need to go and sort this out. So it wasn't really on my radar. But what I did have was, the sort of issues around the side. And I never really paid attention to those issues. I didn't really link them all up to one thing. There was like, I had skin problems, or I was seeing a counselor for depression, or, I was unhappy, miserable, I was overweight. So I had all of these things. And in 2013, I came across this thing called Headspace, which of course we've all heard of now. I started meditating on the train, and I got this awareness, and I thought, you know what? I think alcohol is causing me more trouble than I realize. And so I decided to take a break, 90 days. And that's it for me. I mean, I was just absolutely blown away. Fitter, faster, healthier, happier, better dad, better husband. Everything improved. And so that's really where we came up with the idea for 1 Year No Beer. It doesn't matter what you have said to me about not drinking. I'd have never listened to you. I had to experience it for myself. So in creating 1 Year No Beer, it was just to be a challenge. This is just a challenge. Just come and give it a try. Anyone, it's for anyone. Forget about whether you have a problem, think you problem, or don't have a problem. That's irrelevant. Come and be, better in life. So where is my drinking now? So I did 2 years not drinking, and totally transformed my life in that period. And now, as I tell people, and I may be rushing on here a bit, so feel free to interrupt me, Martin, but now I tell people I drink as much as I want whenever I want. I just usually choose not to have a drink. And I think that's the place where it's no longer a part of any need. Like, there's no coming home and needing a drink. There's no associating it with food. There's no, if I go out to a party, I'm expected to, all of that kind of stuff. And so that's what we are, what we want to be the experts at, is helping people to change their relationship with alcohol so that they put themselves back in the driving seat. Oh, are you silent, Martin, or am I?
Sorry, that's absolutely fantastic. And thank you for getting us off to a great start. Aneet, what brings you here today?
So I've been alcohol-free. It'll be 5 years in 30 days. So basically, I was my drinking started to escalate from about 2010, where I really started to misuse alcohol as a coping mechanism. I had lots of issues that I wasn't sort of dealing with, such as anxiety, self-esteem, confidence, etc. And alcohol was really undermining my progress. And basically, I decided I wasn't really being the best human being that I could be. I was about 22 stone in weight. I was sort of really unhappy, sort of depression, eating too much, I was working too hard. I wasn't looking after myself. I was binge drinking. I was drinking constantly. There was all manner of matters going on, lack of emotional connection and relationships. So I had a couple of rock bottoms and, a couple of sort of points, and I tried to quit for a bit, moderate for a bit, but I never actually dealt with the fact that alcohol was the actual issue causing the problems. I was using alcohol to cope with issues alcohol was causing by the end. And I think that's where it really started to escalate to the point where I actually became physically and psychologically addicted. I'm not ashamed in saying that. I went through withdrawal. I went to A&E. So basically that came to a head on 28th of August, 2015. And on the 29th of August, 2015, I came out of a health center after suffering withdrawal, and I designed my own behavioral change program consisting of exercise, meditation, spirituality, volunteering, learning about alcohol and culture and social conditioning. I basically changed my behavior, rewired my brain, and I'm happy to say that I'll hope to be alcohol-free the rest of my life. I don't miss it at all. And my life has been transformed incredibly. And I'm just in a much happier place. And now it's got to the stage where actually I don't really feel the need to have alcohol, at all in any social situation. I also spent a lot of time studying alcohol and culture, and coming from two different cultures, being a British Indian, there was a lot of sort of toxic masculinity to drink, which never really sat well with me. And it was never really in my nature. So essentially, alcohol eroded my personality to the point where I didn't recognize myself and where I was destroying myself. And now that I basically don't feel the need to have it in my life, and I'm in a much happier place. Sorry, I rambled on. I joined Club Soda in March 2018, just stumbling across it at an airport going on holiday. Thinking to myself, wouldn't it be nice to have to go on holiday with the sober friends? Where do I find sober friends? I'll come, obviously to change my sort of friendship group, but that's another story. And then I joined Club Soda and got to know Laura and Drew and whatnot, and here I am.
Oh, that's fantastic, and thank you. And you've highlighted some really important discussion areas that I think we'll come back to later about, masculinity and what it means to be a man, and how we navigate that, particularly in relation to alcohol. Tony, what brings you here this evening?
A very kind invite to join the panel. So thanks for the introduction. I come at this from a sort of an academic perspective, and don't have don't have a particular story around alcohol. I'm not a sort of social drinker. I've never really had particular issues, bar during student years and missing the occasional tube train home. So sort of a relatively innocuous relationship with alcohol to some extent. But I've always been fascinated, while I specialise in addiction more broadly, with alcohol specifically because of the fairly unique hold that it seems to have over us because of the cultural pressures and norms and so on that sit around it. And also a particular interest of mine is and it sort of fits in with a lot of the research that I do around sort of messaging and trying to spread greater awareness about alcohol, is just how little, for a drug that's probably more ubiquitous than paracetamol in most societies, many societies, how little people actually know about it. There's so many myths, so much misunderstanding, whether about the psychology or the pharmacology of alcohol. People understand really very little. And I think that partly and often sits behind some of the challenges that we face when trying to not necessarily support individuals that have got quite severe alcohol dependence problems, but the much larger group of people that simply experience some harm from alcohol. And there's this strong binary that I think most people would probably recognise that exists, where you either accept you've got a problem or you're okay with alcohol. And accepting that you've got a problem is synonymous with being an alcoholic, with all the stigmatising language that sits around that. And so a lot of the work that I've done, I'm also a trustee with Alcohol Change UK. I've worked previously with Drink Aware and other organisations to try to increase an awareness and understanding about the harms that can come with drinking and the sorts of things that you can do to minimise those, even if your aim and your goal isn't sobriety and sort of sober living. Linked in with all of that, I come from a sort of a working class, single parent family background, so a sort of a bit of an outsider in academia more broadly. And I've got a particular interest in the work that I do in addiction, whether it's alcohol related or other, in the sorts of inequalities that sit around the support available to people, and something I think I'd be really interested to sort of discuss and hear views from the panel on, are some of the inequalities that we know exist, not just about men, but about, say, working class men or people that aren't white in relation to some of the support structures that exist to help people that are experiencing difficulties with alcohol. I know from the work that we've done evaluating Dry January, for example, it in effect is for white middle class women, like overwhelmingly in terms of the people that report doing it, it's white middle class women across the UK. And so it's not just men, it's kind of almost every other segment of society that sort of initiative, Dry January, that sort of intervention, either isn't reaching or simply doesn't resonate with certain segments of society who are just as likely and in some cases more likely to experience harm. So those are the sorts of interests that drive me, the sort of the equality side of it, but also I guess just a deep-seated concern that for something that so many people engage with so frequently, we ought to know a bit more about it, and we don't. So that's me.
That's brilliant, and thank you for bringing up the topic of health inequalities, because you can't talk about men's health and well-being without talking about health inequalities. The differences between different groups of men are dramatic in health outcomes. We're seeing it in COVID at the moment. Which job you do, what background you come from, is having a huge impact on people's infection rates and survival rates. Shea, thank you for joining us from the United States, although less of achievement in this world of Zoom and digital online meetings than it once would have been. But still very good to see you. Please introduce yourself and what brings you here today, and what's your background with alcohol?
Sure. I'm honored to be here. So my name is Shea Boland. I'm a men's transformational coach. I work with men on a deeper, more emotional, therapeutic relationship, so much more than just fitness. I come from the background of the personal training industry, and fitness was the framework that I worked with people for many years. But then I started noticing of these bigger questions of seeing the pain that is caused in men in particular in regards to their substance use, their alcohol use, their inability to navigate their emotions in a more skillful way. everything from career and fulfillment to breakups to who am I outside of my career? Who am I outside of my personal relationships? More of a introspective soul question. And so I'm a guide of sorts, holding powerful space for men to do the sacred masculine work, I like to call it. What led me to this is my life could really be divided into two halves in a sense. The first half was a very selfish way of living, really establishing my ego in a sense, and living fast, partying hard, all the drugs, lots of alcohol, binge drinking. And little did I know what was happening was, this is how I navigate my emotions, and I don't really know another way. At a very young age, I was introduced to alcohol and drugs, and there became just such a grasp, being so tethered to that solution, where my inner resourcefulness started to become so distant. And this really was the catalyst to a rock bottom in 2012 in Los Angeles, California, when I was in and out of treatment and detox centers for my alcohol and drug use for many years, but this was it. This was either die or get sober. And so that was October 26th of 2012, and I've been sober ever since. And thus was the new chapter, the second half of life, more of a purposeful journey of devoting myself to not only my own healing and my own growth, but to serving others, helping others heal. And so there's a variety of modalities that I use. I work with people with addiction. I speak with treatment centers around Texas, and then my clients as well. I teach meditation, I teach breath work, and so all these different modalities to bring more awareness on the inner journey, I like to call it, having more of an inner orientation. How can men get better at taking care of themselves internally, and then they meet the world, the external world, with a little bit more grace, a little bit more clarity and guidance to be men of integrity, and not need things like alcohol or promiscuous sex or the pursuit of money to be okay. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think that theme of that relationship with being a man, but having permission to take care of yourself is one that maybe we'll try and explore in the time available. It's very thought-provoking. Daniel, what brings you here? What's your journey? What's your relationship, your drinking experience?
I really wish you hadn't have left me till last, because I feel deeply unqualified to be here now, because it's nowhere near as a story as everybody else. But I'll skip the history because it's pretty common. But I became a daily heavy drinker as a result of just a continuous cycle of just drinking more and more, and it just became the norm. I'm a photographer. I'm a lecturer. Definitely, sort of alcohol within the creative industries it has a big role to play. I've always said our creatives have like a special relationship with alcohol. What happened was I would start to become concerned about the amount of alcohol that I was consuming. And so I would try and do things like the dry January, sober for Octobers, and I couldn't do them. And that was the thing that kind of scared me the most, was this just inability it just crept up on me on the fact that I couldn't stop drinking, or I couldn't cut down. It would always go back to this sort of square one. Really struggled with willpower, and tried several times, learned a lot along the way. And then my daughter came along nearly 3 years ago, and cut down a little bit, but not really, kind of came back to normal. I could totally function. I could run a business. I could be a lecturer and be a father, but I just felt like I wasn't being 100% all of the time. And there's a lot of guilt wrapped around that kind of thing of like not being present at all times. There was lots of situations that I feel very shameful about, like, not getting up in the night to get her, and kind of relying on my wife because I was probably a bit too drunk, and waking up in the mornings and not really being present and motivated to be engaging with my daughter. And I would make every excuse to just sit down on the sofa and put some TV on and have my coffee. And then that started to have a real effect on me, this kind of parenting. And like I said, I tried several times to cut out alcohol, cut down. And then I was actually introduced to 1 year no beer, and that was 3 months ago. So I'm nowhere near as much of an epic story. I'm 3 months alcohol free nearly, and then I started a podcast, which was kind of an exploration. It was very selfish. It was an exploration of and a research. It was a way of keeping committed to this idea of not drinking for an extended period of time. I've never really ever said that I would not drink again, although the longer I go down this road, the more I feel like I won't, because I'm just not ready to give up these benefits. But that's me.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, there's a lot of very interesting themes that have come through, talking about drinking culture, masculinity, the fact that it's normalized as a man that you're expected to drink. I mean, what are the aspects of male expectations that you think are the biggest issue? I mean, is it the fact that we're all expected to drink as men? Is it the fact that we're discouraged from showing weakness and asking for help? What's going on that leads to men in particular being the overwhelming majority of people who die from alcohol-related disease and have addiction problems of this kind? Why is it us? And does it lead to anything that we need to do differently? Who wants to start on that one?
Not me.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think if you're looking across the range of effectively anyone who's experiencing harm from their alcohol use, all the way up to people that require specialist support because they're physically and psychologically dependent. When you're looking at people that might use drug and alcohol treatment services, it's actually women who often feel very excluded because of the shame and stigma that goes along often with, say, being a mother, that it's more unexpected. And so it's at the other end amongst harmful and hazardous drinkers, I think, where particularly the sorts of movements, Dry January, 1 year no beer, club soda and so on, that seem to be more attractive to women. And I think for the reasons that you mentioned, the expectations, the sort of the association with drinking and masculinity, the idea that you're not on the same level if you're not drinking. So going out with a group and not drinking is, why bother? Like I might as well say, stay at home. Seems to be something that impacts men more, and I think coupled with the tendency for men to be a bit less emotionally engaged and therefore to not want to talk about those sorts of things or to be the odd one out or the black sheep, I think is all part of it. But there is that interesting kind of dynamic that if you're looking at addiction treatment services, it will be women that report the much harder time, feeling a lot less accepted, less likely to want to attend, not only because they're the minority, just in terms of the volume. But yeah, it's interesting then that amongst people who might be looking for not requiring specialist treatment or medication or detox or that sort of thing, but are looking for more of a self-help or a peer support type intervention, it seems that women are much more able to access those, and men seem to be, at least in terms of the numbers of us doing it, far less likely to engage.
What's others people's experience in terms of this relationship between masculinity and drink, and how do you overcome it? Ruari first, and then Shea, I think.
Well, all I was going to say, I mean, if you look at society, I mean, if you look at the first introductions of alcohol, certainly for a young lad, and my perspective was, I arrived into secondary school, and it was like, what, you haven't been drunk yet? What's wrong with you? And so literally pedaled down to somewhere quiet and sculled a litre bottle of half whiskey and half port, because I thought whiskey mixed with a dark coloured liquid, that must be port. Anyway, I was very ill. But the thing is, you look at things like the military or rugby, sport, university, and what you've got is this, even school, many people's school experience, young age, it's all part of that, and that's been brought down from generations above, where you're tough, you drink, that's what you are, you're a man, you drink faster. I mean, you learn to drink quick and you learn to scull pints or shots. And all of that is that societal pressure. And this is like the system. And the system has started so long ago and then been ingrained. And then, of course, in a way, alcohol companies have taken the advantage of that with marketing and going into sports and focusing on those things and really intrinsically linked. So we start this part and our brains start to learn that alcohol equals status, and it does. And when alcohol equals status, status is really primary for human beings. And I'm constantly trying to assess whether something I do is going to heighten my status in society or reduce it. And so if I don't drink, well, the same thing is around, right? You don't drink, what's wrong with you? You're going to be boring. No, you're outcast. Don't invite him. I have stood next to people and they were like, look, that guy's an amazing cricketer. We should really have him. He'll help us smash the team. We can't bring him along. He doesn't drink, right? So it's so there in society. And I think that, men, macho, that whole bravado stuff is really linked into us as well. So because that status piece is so linked, it's harder for us to step out into that place where we're being the outlier. Even when you and I remember this experience of being the new dads at the school, and you go along and you go there and it's like, wow, this is such a pressure. I can feel it. I was choosing not to drink at the time, but I could feel that people were making a judgment based on me because I wasn't drinking. And I think that's a lot less with women. I think it's a lot more accepted with women, whereas I think with men, it's just so ingrained. And we talk about, so many people say, well, culture's changing and, millennials are drinking less. And so we see that actually in certain areas, yes, there is now a valid excuse for a man to choose not to drink, but not if you're wandering around all over the place. Not if you go into a pub. I mean, I'm the west coast of Scotland right now, right? No, it's not. It's still that you need to have a drinker on you. And if you don't have a drink on you, there's something wrong with you. So it is very ingrained in society. And I think that the one thing I've learned in, setting up 1 year No Beer, we've now been 5 years at this. I thought this paradigm shift was going to be over the first year. I was like, we're going to miss this. It's happening. And it's not. This thing, World Health Organization is predicting alcohol to rise in Europe by some 18% over the next decade. In America, over 20% over the next decade. Like, this is not changing. Paradigm shifts happen very slowly. Yes, it's an amazing time to choose to be sober, alcohol-free, or to change your relationship with alcohol because there's so many more people doing that. But as a majority, the world is still drinking more.
But you are, I mean, everybody here, or most people here have done that. So I'm interested in how that fits. Is masculinity changing? Shea, you said something very interesting about emotional transformation. I mean, what's your take on this relationship between masculinity and alcohol? And we know that relationship is there. But what I'm intrigued about is how you're finding ways to transform it.
Right. So one unique angle to look at this is I'm going to kind of bring it down from less of a cultural thing or a societal thing and just an individual relationship with an external substance. And we can look at alcohol as not the problem. It's just a solution. It's just something, it's just a spirit, right? It's just a liquid. But there's a conscious decision, or subconscious at times, right? To reach for this solution, in a sense, to change the way that one is feeling internally. There is a grasping. And I think maybe Tony knows a lot more of the academic research that to support this, but I would be safe to bet that adolescence, at such a formative time in a young man's brain, when he gets introduced to something as powerful as alcohol and starts just the patterns and the programming that happens, it really hijacks the brain in a sense. It kind of rewires it to say that, hey, here's an option for you to feel a little more comfortable in such a kind of fish out of water feeling in high school or at a young age. And then on top of that, the trend of like a lack of emotional intelligence, and from a lot of our fathers as men were just not there for us emotionally in the way that we needed intimacy to be modeled to us. And we really had to just kind of wing it. I know at a very young age, I mean, just getting blasted with pornography and introduced to tobacco and alcohol and women and and getting a little taste of money. It's just like my priorities completely shifted as a man. And I want more of that. That looks cool. That makes me feel good. And taking care of myself and talking about my emotions, that's not cool. I'm not going to fit in with the football players with that way. And so there's a response to stress that is just instantly implanted in us, I think, as young adults. And that turns into some full-blown problems in a very unhealthy relationship with alcohol down the road.
So we're and that relates actually to one of the questions that we've been asked is, are we using alcohol to mask, or is one of the ways that people use alcohol to mask mental health concerns? Absolutely. I think this point, I'm still keen to understand what we can do, because I think if all we come out is saying, well, male culture requires us to have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, then there's no hope for us all. But actually what I'm hearing is that you are finding ways of doing it, and you are finding ways to help other people make that change. Anit, you talked about your peers and peer support. It's interesting in the world of mental health, that we hear a lot about men's sheds, for example, on the basis that if you invite men to unleash their feelings and come and talk, they won't do it. If you invite them to go and whittle a piece of wood for 4 hours, then after 4 hours, they'll turn to the bloke next to them and maybe start having a meaningful conversation. You talked about adjusting your peer group and who you were with, I think. And maybe tell us, I'm just interested, was that a way that you were helping to kind of get past conventional pressures of masculinity?
Yes, it was, Martin, and also I think it was necessary for my journey as well, because I started becoming over the years the person that I was when I was younger, when I was sort of a teenager, before sort of alcohol took over. And I realized that actually the peer group that I was hanging around was full of sort of toxic masculinity and big drinkers, and all we had in common was alcohol. We didn't have anything else in common. And the more I started to strip the alcohol away and them away, the more I became myself and started to actually cultivate relationships with friends in a real way, family, and then also attract what you put out. I think this is as Shea said, it's a very sort of an internal transformation that you undertake. And basically you start to kind of attract those like-minded people, and you then start being in support group, or you start building peer groups where, for example, all my friends now, they're into sort of meditation, spirituality. I'm a volunteer ranger with the local national park, very much into sort of environmental causes as well, and raising money for charity. I fundraise doing endurance hikes for children's charities, and those are my rewards. And and I think you actually lose that ego to actually be that sort of toxic masculine person, because the alcohol fuels that kind of image, that ego becomes id, and that becomes sort of super ego. I've probably got that completely wrong. I'm not a psychologist at all. But, so forgive me, Tony, forgive me, Shea. I'm just, I'm a bigger muppet. But, you really do become into that sort of super ego, and alcohol fuels that. So when you strip that away, you become more real and authentic. And I think that's what this journey is about. And I think in terms of your question, Martin, about what do we do about that for men masking mental health issues? And because I masked my mental health issues by drinking, by putting this persona out that was fake, and having this image in my head. And I think things like this, forums like this, Club Soda, and actually encouraging 1 Year No Beer, that the podcast, that's all fabulous. And I think more of that needs to be done at an accentuated level. And so I think having this and carrying on with this, I think is really sort of necessary, and also a kind of, I think, increasing awareness about alcohol, and because I've done lots of studying and reading about the negative effects of alcohol on the mind, on the body. I think that education as well will really change people's perceptions that it's not conducive to a healthy lifestyle.
Daniel, because I realise it's this point about reward, and I was interested. Is that it's turned up in one of the questions where it's saying, how do we deal with those periods when you don't feel rewarded for your sobriety? But I suppose there is the reverse of that, which is toxic versions of masculinity can actually reward not being sober. How do we manage that? How do we create a positive space to not be drunk in, and make that feel something that's positive and rewarded? Although I would say that the comments that we're getting on the side would say that at least amongst the people watching this video, we're getting a lot of reward, which is appreciated. But I'm just, how do you manage that? Do you have a sense of loss in terms of alcohol, or do you have a sense of benefit and new forms of reward?
It's a really it's a difficult question, and I will say that in my short sort of 3 months of not drinking, I've received way more support than negativity in my peer group, and sort of, I'm 31. Most of my friends are sort of roughly around that age, and just touching briefly onto the fact that why aren't more men coming forward with these kinds of issues? I think they are. I think I don't know whether it's a generational thing, but men are being definitely in my circles more open to mental health and sharing. I think it's just starting to trickle through. But when it comes to like the benefits of not drinking and stuff, we touched on it briefly earlier. Was I think one of the things that's we're really lacking in is positive role models for people who make a decision not to drink, and because that's the people that we want to be looking at and admiring, and not necessarily just from a point of view of someone who's hit rock bottom. I think a lot of people can't necessarily, it's difficult for let's say the general public, I don't want to generalize too much, to associate with someone who's like really hit rock bottom when it comes to alcohol abuse, but actually just having a mindset of maybe I'm drinking a little bit too much. I don't think there's as much talk about the sort of that level of alcoholism, and I'm desperate to find more people who have made conscious decisions because of health, because of relationships, and because of productivity, that we can really be like boosting up. I might not have answered the question there, Martin. I'm sorry. I think I just went off on a massive tangent.
I think you have, and I think you've moved the discussion in a very interesting direction in terms of talking about new positive norms and forms, and is there a generational shift, and are we seeing, is there a difference with younger people, and is their relationship to alcohol changing?
I think so.
Yeah. What do other people think? Is this a generational thing? Is that a factor at least? Or I mean, Tony was talking about inequalities. Oh, sorry. Tony, maybe you were talking about inequalities. I mean, how is this varying with people, and is there an evolution over time, or are there still?
There are some trends, the sort of overall less drinking and so on. But again, I don't think it's even, and I don't think it's necessarily the result of purposeful things that society's done to try and improve it. And I was just reflecting as we were having this conversation on the role of masculinity. I mean, we all accept, I think, that men have got a lot to answer for, and masculinity is a bit of a problem globally for so many different reasons. But I was reflecting and just thinking about, for example, Weight Watchers. Only about 10% of people attending Weight Watchers are men, and it's not because men in general are in better shape. And I think one of the concerns I have sometimes about the dialogue that goes on, particularly nowadays about the sorts of things people can do to kind of self-actualize and improve their life and so on, is that in order to reduce your alcohol consumption, whether it's going to no drinking or just halving it or whatever it might be, I worry that the barrier to entry, the ticket price, as it were, is going to be just too high for some people, because the proposition isn't just, if you were to cut back a little bit, then actually you might live a bit longer and see your grandkids kind of growing up, as opposed to putting yourself into an early grave because of cardiovascular, stroke risk, whatever it might be. The price of entry is also, you need to get in touch with yourself. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think for people that do that, the rewards are probably far more significant. But I guess going back to the point I made at the start, there is a very large, much larger segment of the population who drink alcohol in a harmful way, who aren't physically dependent. If anything, they're psychologically dependent, but you could argue around the edges of definitions of that, all you want. But they're not people that are going to experience withdrawal if they stop drinking for a week. So they wouldn't recognise themselves as, in their minds, having a problem, but they are experiencing harm. They're going to be shortening their lives. They'll be, having increases in anxiety and so on. And it's that group that I feel often are excluded more, because the only way that you can do it is to engage in almost like a performative reduction in your alcohol use, to make it a thing, as opposed to it just being acceptable to say, I'm not going to have a drink tonight, boys.
I'd like to kind of, I mean, just to follow on from that, and I'm glad you mentioned weight management, and I would recommend the Men's Health Forum guide, How to Make Weight Management Services Work for Men, because it is actually possible to make weight management services that work for men. And you're right, the Weight Watchers is only 10%. It's possible to get much higher. But people have had success. There's Man v Fat Football, for example, which has actually worked with certain masculine tropes and ideas and use that as a way of helping to get change. So, is this going to be possible in a unisex way, I suppose, is a question. I mean, somebody's asked, how can women help? How can men help? Do we need a male-focused version of this? What's the alcohol equivalent of, well, maybe we actually, maybe Ruari already has it, but what's the alcohol equivalent of Man v Fat Football? Do we need to work with traditional forms of masculinity as well as confronting them? I don't know who wants to get stuck in on that.
I'll take that, because I think that was the purpose of 1 Year No Beer. If I'm honest, we did miss the mark with where we originally directed it. But more and more we are working. Now, we're not exclusive men. We're actually predominantly women who sign up to 1 Year No Beer. But it was originally designed to be like we had like Tough Mudder as a brand, saying, let's make this tough. Let's make this a challenge. Let's make this something cool. Let's make this something you can be proud of when you're in the pub with the lads talking to people, because we really designed it for ourselves. And so I think that's why we've had considerably more men join us than other platforms, and that we continue to. So I think we've got to speak to men in a different voice. And I think that the evolution of our product and where we're going, we just raised another, by the end of this week, it'll be 2 million in funding, part of a crowdfunding raise and then some direct. The evolution of our product is really to keep focusing on that part, not to be exclusive, but to really try and crack into the male piece. Just coming on to that, I think that society is shifting anyway. Men are talking more. We talked all about this already. Men are discussing more. Mental health is more able to talk about. It's much easier than it ever has been for a man to put down the drink. It doesn't take away the fact that there is a huge amount of peer pressure out there. Society out there is still drinking more, but it's never been easier for a man to put down the booze or to change their relationship with alcohol. Employers are changing the way they have expectations. You're seeing some of the really big firms in London start to communicate from the top down that it's no longer acceptable, that those kind of lunch behavior isn't. I mean, when I was there, the lunch behavior was absolutely nuts, right? I mean, you could go to lunch at midday and finish at 5 o'clock in the morning, and if you wanted, you could do that 4 times a week. So so changing that, all of that, corporate culture is changing, and I think that the bits that we are targeting going forward, again, we're seeing millennials really change, which is exciting. But sport places, encouraging sport to really stand up and offers good alternatives, alcohol-free alternatives, all sorts of things like that. So it's very exciting. The next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a lot more men, specifically changing their relationship with alcohol. We still have a long way to go.
That's a very optimistic note to end on. I was hoping to get a last comment from everybody, but I think we have about 12 seconds to go. So Ruari, Aneet, Tony, Shea, Dan, thank you all very much indeed. That was a really interesting and enjoyable conversation, and thank you for all the input you've brought to it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Sorry,
thank you.
For the last comment.
Honor to be here.
Great.